The Batman Arkham franchise, some of our favorite childhood games of all time that we still continue to play to this very day. Regardless if we've played the game dozens of times or not at this point, any of them that you could argue, honestly, they're all still very amazing games. And with the release of Batman Arkham Shadow, I thought it was only fair to go through each and every Batman Arkham game and say one thing that they did the best out of the entire Arkham franchise. And now we are going to be including Batman Arkham Shadow. Some might be obvious, but some might not be. Now, remember, these are all just my opinions. You guys might think that certain games did said thing better in another Arkham game, and that's totally fine. That's all kind of just up to your own interpretation, but I wanted to give my thoughts on this because I thought this was a really cool concept and something that we could do. And I'm going to start off us with Batman Arkham Asylum. What is the thing that Batman Arkham Asylum did best? Well, I think this one's a pretty obvious answer, and that's the overall atmosphere of the game, right? Because Batman Arkham Asylum was, it was a fantastic game, and it was way ahead of its time. And even though I think nowadays the game is starting to show some of its age, that it's just not as good as compared to the other games. But that's an appraisal on future titles, and I've said that before. And this game is still a very good game. But the overall atmosphere in this game is something that just hasn't been able to be replicated outside of Batman Arkham Asylum for a couple different reasons. First of all, the game takes place on an island, right? And so the map is smaller. And that's just because the developers only had so much to work with. But with that smaller map, kind of comes an aura, right? Almost like a sense of claustrophobia. You can't get off the island. You're on such a small space. Now, granted, the map isn't like super, super tiny where you're stuck in one house or something like that, but there are very few buildings to choose from to enter on this map. There's only a few places you can go throughout the entire course of this game. You can't just escape to the other side of the map as if you were playing Batman Arkham Knight or as if you were playing one of the Spider-Man games or something like that. Overall in this game, it does a really good job at the creepy aura as well as you go through various buildings in this game, whether, botanical gardens or if you're kind of making your way through the asylum and you're finally approaching the time where you are dealing with, the actual insane people, the actually mentally ill people. It kind of has a creepy feeling to it because at any moment, one of these, I don't even want to call them thugs because they're not even thugs, one of these insane people could jump up at you and absolutely take you for a whirl. And it can be very, very creepy at times. It almost has a creepy aura to it. Or when you're doing like the Killer Croc mission down in the sewers. Overall, it just has the creepiest horror vibe, especially when you add in, Scarecrow's fear tactics. It makes it all that much more creepy and scary to deal with throughout the course of this game. So, yeah, I would definitely say that the atmosphere is something that Arkham Asylum did best that other games just weren't able to replicate, because I don't think the other games were able to have that same sort of creepiness and aura-like feeling in the air with those games. Next up, we have Batman Arkham City. Now, this game does a lot of things extremely well, right? I mean, the campaign is pretty good. I've gone over and played it again recently, and I had a lot of fun playing it. I had a lot of enjoyment towards it. The side missions in this game are pretty good. I wouldn't say there's anything that's like too elite, but there are a few pretty interesting ones, and I do enjoy them. Even the Riddler trophies, even though there's a lot of them, there's nothing really that's like too complicated that you can't figure out yourself. Like nothing that's really out of the blue. It's so hard to figure out these riddles and puzzles. No, most of them you can figure out with just a little bit of brain power. I would say the map size is pretty good. Like, a lot of stuff about this game is good, right? But it doesn't necessarily have the best anything. You could argue the campaign's better in Origins, or Asylum, or Night, or even Shadow, depending on what you're into. You could argue the side missions are better in other games, like Origins and Night. You could argue the map and the combat and such are better in other games. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this game does anything like that would be considered the best. But there is one thing that this game does better than any other game, at least for me, with the exception of maybe Arkham Origins, but I think City clears on this one, and that's the replayability. This game is so good for me to the point where I can go back, play the entire campaign, and plus maybe even do some side missions, and not necessarily get bored by it. Whereas with the other ones like Arkham Asylum, and particularly Arkham Knight's story, I have to take breaks, or I have to stop playing for the day altogether, because I just find myself getting a little bit bored. And even Origins to a degree, but Origins isn't as bad, but City's the best when it comes to being able to play through the entire campaign, doing extra side missions and everything. and just not feeling bored, feeling engaged, because the combat's good enough for me to where I'm still having a good time. It's not too easy, it's not too hard, it's kind of in that good old sweet spot. Whereas for other games, I find, like I said, it just doesn't entertain me in the same sort of way. So I would definitely say that Batman Arkham City just overall has the best replayability, and I think it's also for a multitude of different reasons. Like the traversal's a lot better than Asylum in this game. You can actually use the grapple boost to get around. It doesn't take too long to fly around the entire map. It's kind of just the perfect overall size. The side missions are intriguing enough to where you can keep playing it for a while until you get to the point where you're just Riddler trophies. Then it's kind of a bit of a process, but even that's not too bad overall. So this game, yeah, definitely the best replayability. For Batman Arkham Origins, there is a couple things that you could potentially debate could be seen as the best in the franchise, right? And that's going to come down to two different things here. One would be the boss fights, and a lot of people would say the boss fights in this game are the best, partially due to the fact that this game is surrounded by boss fights. That's kind of the premise of this game, is trying to stop 8 assassins from killing you. That's kind of how it starts, at least. However, as the game goes on, it becomes more about the Joker, but that's a separate thing. But you could also argue that this game, and this might seem like a bit of a cop-out, but this is the one that I'm going to lean towards in this one for a couple different reasons, but that's creating a good origin story. Now, that sounds like a cop-out, right? But I would argue that you can say that Batman Arkham Shadow's origin stories are the best origin stories out of the entire franchise, because there's multiple characters such as, Jonathan Crane, Harleen Quinzel, you see Jim Gordon relatively at the beginning of his career, you see Carmine Falcone. You see, Barbara Gordon turn into Oracle. You see a multitude of different characters in their origin stories and how they turn into this, either Batman friendship or enemy. However, I would argue that Origins does a better job with the origin story because of the Joker, right? Now, the Joker isn't everything, but the Joker is... he makes up a good portion of this franchise. Without the Joker, this franchise doesn't really exist. So I have to give the nod to Batman Arkham Origins for creating the best origin story. But there's also Oracle in it. There's also Jim Gordon in it. There's also Bane. There are other characters, Slade Wilson in this game, Deadshot. There's a multitude of different characters. Killer Croc, I'm thinking of them off the top of my head, that definitely do a better job than Batman Arkham Shadow. But if you were to say that Batman Arkham Shadow has better origin story, I wouldn't necessarily, argue that point with you. And the reason why I didn't say the boss fights for sure, because first of all, it comes down to preference. It's kind of whatever you prefer in a boss fight. But also, someone could argue that Batman Arkham City has the best boss fights in this game. Simply for the Ra's al Ghul and the Mr. Freeze boss fights, those could be some people's favorites, and they might favor them over ones such as Deadshot, Deathstroke, any other ones that you could think of in that game off the top of your head. But in my opinion, Batman Arkham Origins clears in terms of creating an origin story. The only way that you could say that Arkham Shadow does better is if you like the Two-Face, revelation, how, Harvey Dent turns into Two-Face, how you could see that, Harleen Quinzel has once again been manipulated, wants to see the good in everybody, and that's why she kind of turns into Harley Quinn, and how Jonathan Crane turned into this crazy guy that we ended up seeing in Batman Arkham Knight. So it's kind of just up to whatever you personally prefer, but I think that Batman Arkham Origins did the origin story aspect the best. Now for Batman Arkham Knight, I don't want to do like another cop-out entry, but honestly, I don't really have much of a choice when you look at this game through the ins and the outs. And that's going to be the combat, the melee, the stealth, all that sort of stuff was definitely the best in Batman Arkham Knight. You had more options, you had more abilities, you had more ways to take out enemies instead of just like the simple strike, whatever. There was more ways to take out enemies in stealth. There were more ways to, with environmental takedowns in the combat sections. There was just more ways to deal with thugs in Batman Arkham Knight in more entertaining ways instead of just the same old rinse and repeat stuff that, Arkham Asylum City and Origins did on rinse and repeat. Now, that's not to throw shade at those other games. Rocksteady just did a good job of developing a really solid combat system that still holds up fantastically to this day. Every time I play Batman Arkham Knight, I look forward the most to the overall combat sections. And I mentioned earlier about, Batman Arkham Knight's story not being that great. It's very okay, but I find myself getting very bored every time I play it. And yes, you can argue that's because I've already played that game. That's a very valid point, and I can absolutely understand that. However, I would also argue that if I'm able to play the city story without getting bored, then I don't necessarily think it's due to replay it to like the fact that I've already played Batman Arkham Knight, so I wouldn't necessarily argue that as a fair point. And the side missions of this game kind of fall flat. The map of this game not my favorite. And I could have went with another cop-out and saying the Batmobile, because it's the only game that the Batmobile's in. But I wasn't going to do that. I was going to kind of try to keep it somewhat fair and realistic to what all the games did to a degree. So I would definitely say that the overall combat stealth is superior in this game. And you could argue DLC was done the best in this game as well. You could say that the A Matter of Family story pack was done really well. And the other ones that were very mid in my opinion. But some people might really like the DLC in Batman Arkham Knight. But I would also argue Origins did a better job just simply with a Cold Heart DLC. That's the best story one out of the entire franchise. I don't care what anyone else says. So the combat and the stealth in this game are definitely done best in Batman Arkham Knight. And finally, you have Batman Arkham Shadow. What did Batman Arkham Shadow do best out of the entire franchise? Well, that for me is actually quite simple. The game did the best job of making you feel like Batman. Because throughout the entire franchise, you do feel like Batman. You are stopping the bad guys, but it's not the same thing as when you're in the first-person point of view. You're punching the thugs yourself. You're interrogating the thugs yourself. You're taking out guys with guns yourself, with your own hands, essentially. You're doing everything with your own hands. You're moving around yourself. You're taking out thugs. You're trying to capture the bad guys, whatever. You're trying to get the Rat King. You're trying to investigate in Blackgate Prison. You're doing all this by yourself. Whereas, yeah, you're technically doing it by yourself in the other games, but it doesn't have the same sort of feeling as when you're in the first-person point of view. You put the cowl on your head, and you're dealing with everything by yourself. I would say that Batman Arkham Shadow did the best job of that, while also telling an interesting enough story for me to want to play throughout the entire course of these games. But there isn't really a lot for me to say on this one. I would definitely argue that Batman Arkham Shadow's best feature was actually making you feel like you're playing as Batman. And guys, this is one thing that every single Batman Arkham game did best. Let me know what you guys think each Batman Arkham game did best down in the comments below. And let me know what you guys want to see next. I think I'm going to do re-ranking the Batman Arkham franchise, because now that Arkham Shadows come out, I'm going to re-rank them all in order based on what I think, because my opinions have probably changed since I've last made those videos. I mean, it's been almost a year since I've made those videos, and now that I think about it, I've been making these videos for a while now, so I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a thumbs up on the video, and make sure to subscribe for more content, and make sure to turn on the notification bell so you get all notifications for when I upload. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!